No, it's not the Soviet Union or Venezuela or Cuba that people like Bernie Sanders want us to replicate. They always say that it's these mystical Nordic countries, these Scandinavian countries, that they're the ones that have socialism right. But we are here to dispel that myth and tell you about the 10 facts you need to know about the Nordic socialism myth. But before we get into any of that, I do have to say the thing that I've been saying at the beginning of all of these videos is that we need your help to get this word out there. Google, Facebook, YouTube, they're not doing us any favors. And I used to say that before, but like now they're like breaking our legs when it comes to it. Before it was they wouldn't put us our material out there, but now they're like stifling our material from getting out there. So we need you to hit those share buttons, those like buttons, leave a comment, and use social media against these people. But Justin, I mean, the Nordic socialism myth, this is a thing it's been like a cornerstone of our project since basically day one. Why is it so important?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the most important thing for people to keep in mind is that socialism has been a horribly spectacular failure. It's always failed. It's never been successful. Anywhere it's ever been tried for 150 years or more, it's never worked anywhere. And so in order for people who believe in this ideology to combat that, they have to find some kind of example that they can point to and say, oh, here's our example of success, because they don't really have any, right? Like I can point to a million examples. It's not hard to find an example of it failing, and failing really spectacularly. Like it's really easy to find an example of socialism, of socialist party or communist party just murdering people everywhere. Like it's not hard to do, super easy, right? You want wheelbarrows full of cash, easy to find it. You're looking for gulags, they got them, right? Like they've got whatever I want to find, I can find it.
Right.
But they're the ones that need to find an example of it working. So what's emerged out of that is this myth about Scandinavian socialism, where they say, look, yes, you're right, China, horrible, lots of mass murdering, Hitler, he wasn't really a socialist, but even if you can get them to admit that he's a socialist, because he actually was, they will deny that mostly. But then they'll say, yeah, okay, fine, maybe he was a socialist, but, forget about Hitler. Forget about the Soviet Union. Forget about Venezuela. We've got the perfect examples, and it is located in this magical land that nobody knows anything about and no one has ever been to before. And it's called Scandinavia. And they're happy. It's a utopia. It's a winter wonderland.
Yeah, they got good hockey teams up there, I think.
They've got great hockey teams. They have, they're all tall, beautiful people.
They created Lego, I think.
They who knows what else? They created happiness. Happiness itself emerged from Scandinavia. And so that's like their go-to example. But the thing is, it's not really socialism and they're not really utopias. And that's the thing. The more you look into it, the more you realize how absolutely ludicrous it is that they use this as their example. But most people, including many conservative people, wrongly argue all the time that this is socialism. It's not socialism. They don't have socialism. What they have is a very unique system that's not really like anything that we have here in the United States. And I think that's why it kind of confuses people. But these are not socialist countries, and that's what this video is all about.
Right. And that kind of brings up point number one. And all of this is in an article. It's nicely written, nicely edited, and is on stoppingsocialism.com.
It's the best article that we've ever published.
Yeah, pretty much. So if you want to share this video or you want the written word, you can go to stoppingsocialism.com and find this article there. But point number one, and Justin, you already started getting into this. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden are not socialist nations. So the biggest proof that we use of this is the Heritage Foundation's rankings, the Index of Economic Freedom rankings. So basically, they take a whole bunch of different metrics, business freedom, trade freedom, property rights stuff, and they quantify it, put it together, and then they determine the rankings that basically show how free of an economy a country is. And what we find with Sweden and Denmark and Norway is that they rank really high up there in this index of freedom. And, like the definition of socialism is basically the government control over, or at least a collective control over the economy. So you would think that a socialist nation you'd find at the very bottom of a ranking like that. In fact, I think North Korea is literally last in that ranking, if they're
Right.
even included. But yeah, what we find here is that these countries are right up there. In fact, which one is it? One of them is above the United States.
I think it's
It's
Denmark, if
and
I
in some
remember
of
right.
in some of these rankings, these specific rankings, like business freedom and government integrity, these countries all end up above the United States. So if the United States isn't a socialist country, then these Nordic countries are certainly not socialist countries.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is that these rankings are of economic freedom.
Yeah.
It's not total freedom in society. So it's not like you'd say, oh, well, maybe they have, controlled economies, but they're free in every other way, because that's what Bernie Sanders and those people say they're going to provide us when they eventually take over the United States. But the reality is that these countries actually have a great deal of economic freedom when you look at regulations, when you look at the tax code, when you look at a whole bunch of other things, you'll see that in category after category, they actually perform better than the United States. Obviously, it's not in every single category, but in many categories, they do perform better than the United States. We're going to get into some of those things
Mhm.
specifically, so I'll hold off on commenting too much about that. But go look at the ratings for yourself, and you'll see. And it's not just one country or two countries; it's all of them rank pretty high.
Right.
They're clearly not socialist economies. There's just
Right.
no doubt about it whatsoever.
And the best little exclamation point on this point is the quote from the Danish Prime Minister Lars Rasmussen, which is he the prime minister still? I'm not entirely
No, I
sure. He
don't think
was
so.
when this quote was quoted. But he said some people in the US associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. And that was like specifically in response to like Bernie Sanders trying to use Denmark as an example of socialism. So if you're not going to listen to their prime minister, if you're not going to listen to us, you have to at least listen to their prime minister.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's move on to point number 2. The Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes are not better off than most Americans. So, Justin, why is this an important point to make here?
Well, that's the other part of the utopian. The utopian argument is the other part of the argument that socialists are always making about Scandinavia. It's not just that they're socialists, which is wrong, but it's also that they're living in utopias that's better than the United States. So it's a combination of both those two things. It's like, look, America, they're better than we are, and they're socialists. So if we were just like they were, became socialists, then we too would be better off. But the ironic thing about that argument is that it's completely wrong on both counts. Not only are they not socialists, but they're actually not better off than we are. Now, people will point to things like their happiness and that sort of thing. There's been surveys that show that they're happier, some surveys that show that Scandinavians are healthier and whatever. A lot of that stuff is taken out of context or sort of irrelevant. All sorts of there's all sorts of cultural reasons why people might be happier, for example, that have nothing to do with how well an economy works. Okay, so you can't really put that into the equation. But when you actually start looking at real economic data, like for example, the average cost of living, the average salary, the average unemployment rate, the size of people's homes, the how many cars people own, how many vacations people go on and on and on. When you look at all these things, you'll see Americans way outperform them, especially when you're looking at salaries before and after taxes. Americans do better. So even when you take the tax issue off the table, because they get taxed much, much higher, we'll get into that later, but they get taxed much higher there. But even if you take that off the table, people earn more money here anyway. And so we're earning more money. We're paying less for our stuff. We have bigger houses. Our houses can be cheaper depending on where you live. You have more cars. You have just a better life. Economically speaking, you have a better life. There's just
Right.
no doubt about it whatsoever.
Yeah, and my favorite kind of anecdotal evidence for this, and this is in Glenn Beck's Arguing with Socialists, is like if you have made a habit out of watching those international house hunter shows, you'll see just like the bang for the buck that you get compared to in America over there is not quite the same. And then there's like the terms like the American appliances or like an American fridge or something like that, because we in America have a much higher standard of kind of what our creature comforts are. And
Yeah.
that's like kind of a direct example of this point here.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that people need to because I think people have this false perception of like, well, oh, it's well, yeah, well, of course, everything in Europe is more expensive. Like there's some sort of magical element of Europe that makes it more expensive. But the fact of the matter is, the reason Europe is more expensive is because they have a lot more taxes, and they have all of, especially taxes, they have a lot of things in Europe that cause things to be more expensive. There's actual economic policies that cause it. It's not just this, well, it's Europe, therefore, of course, it's more expensive. Like, there are reasons why it's more expensive.
Yeah, right. And let's go into point number 3 with that. Point number 3, in Sweden, as well as in Denmark and Norway, all citizens pay high tax rates. So this is, I mean, you kind of actually brought this to my attention. This is the idea that, in America, we have a very progressive income tax. The more money you make, the higher percentage of your income goes to the government. And that is not quite the same as in these Nordic countries. Explain.
Right. This is actually really important. One of the most socialistic parts of the United States economically is that we have a progressive tax code. So the whole concept of a progressive tax code is that the more money you make, the higher the rate is. Okay, because the more money you make, if the rate is flat, you're always going to pay more money in taxes. So this whole concept of not paying your fair share is totally ludicrous. The idea that you have the point of a progressive tax code is to redistribute wealth, so that the more money you make, the higher percentage you pay, which means you're going to take more of your wealth even proportionally and redistribute it to other people in society. That's the whole point. So it's a very socialistic idea. It doesn't mean you're a socialist if you have a progressive tax code, because almost everyone has some kind of progressive tax code. But it is a very socialistic idea. And yet in these countries, they actually do the opposite. They have a top tax rate that occurs relatively low on the income scale, so that people who in America would be considered middle class pay the top tax rate.
Right.
And the number that you gave in the article, I don't think we actually acknowledge that you wrote this article, but the number that's given in the article is that the threshold at which the top marginal tax rate applies is only 1.5 times the country's average income. So if the country's average income is, say, $40,000, 1.5 times $40,000 is where you're going to get the top tax rate.
Right.
Okay, so not that high. Right? That's the whole point. It's not that the tax rate that you would have is maybe 60,000, 65, 70,000, something like that. That's the top rate.
Right.
But in America, it's 9 times that rate.
The average. The average income, right.
Right, sorry. It's 9 times the average income. So that means that you have to make a lot more money than the average person to get to the top tax rate. So the other thing to keep in mind is that the top tax rate is much higher than the top tax rate in the United States. So that means that people who are middle income by American standards pay significantly more in taxes than people who are middle in these Scandinavian countries than they do here in the United States, to the point where, you have people paying half their income in taxes who are middle class. That would never, ever, ever happen in America. Can you imagine in America a politician running on a middle-class family that earns $60-something thousand a year, paying half their income in taxes? There's no way that would ever be tolerated in a million years. The other thing to keep in mind is that they have a value-added tax in these countries, and it's very high. It's like 20, 25%, something like that. That means that everything in that country gets a tax of about 20 to 25% slapped onto it. And so who do you think's paying that? Everyone pays that. Even low-income people pay that. That's why we don't have that here, is because that's a tax that affects lower income people more than everybody else. So why do they do that in those countries? That's not a socialistic thing. That's the opposite. That's more of a flat tax approach, right? The reason they do that is because they have this mindset, this culture there, that everyone in everyone in Scandinavia or whatever needs to chip in. We're all a part of the same thing. We all share these services. We all have to pay and contribute toward it. That's the opposite of what we have here in America, where most people have this idea that, well, no, lower income people, of course, even though they're benefiting the most from these services, they shouldn't have to pay anything in taxes. They should pay nothing. And we should make people who are wealthier pay more in taxes. You have Republicans and Democrats openly calling for cutting taxes even more for lower income people who basically only pay payroll taxes and sales tax and stuff like that. Now, I'm not advocating for more taxes for low income people. What I'm saying is, it's clearly not a socialistic idea to say low income people should pay 25% value added tax or whatever it is. And that's exactly what they have in places like Scandinavia.
Right, right. And another point, and this is just like completely lost on socialists, is the idea of taxing corporations. We have to make sure corporations pay their fair share. Well, it turns out Nordic socialist countries have a relatively low corporate tax rates. So this was a little bit of a surprise to me, because there was a big deal made out of Trump's was it the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where he brought the percentage of the corporate income tax from 35% down to 21%. And so I'm looking at our Nordic counterparts over here. And in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, their percentage of corporate tax rate is 22%, 24%, and 22% respectively. So prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they actually all had much lower corporate income tax rates than we do in America. And in fact, so now it's down to 21% because of that. So they're right in line with us, basically.
Yeah.
But it's like that just flies in the face of everything that like Bernie Sanders types want to say. They actually have a much more economically free country over there. It's just kind of flies in the face of their idea that this is socialism's success story.
Yeah, I mean, just try to imagine Bernie Sanders and an AOC saying that corporations should pay, about what they're paying right now in taxes. Oh, and that lower income people should pay a lot more in taxes. And that middle class people should pay a lot more in taxes. Try to imagine them saying these things. They would never in a million years argue for any of these policies that basically all of the Scandinavian countries have. Right. So you really, when you start to see that kind of thing, when you see big corporations getting basically, remember, up until 2017, they had lower taxes, significantly lower taxes, corporate income taxes, than the United States had.
Yeah.
And yet they were the socialist countries and we were not the socialist countries? I don't think so. And if you go back and look at the economic freedom rankings from back then, you'll see that even more Scandinavian countries ranked higher than the United States prior to Donald Trump being here. There were several that rated higher than the United States. They actually have fallen off compared to the United States since Donald Trump became president. So again, this idea that they were these socialist utopias, just completely factually inaccurate. There's no evidence to support that at all.
How about free college? They'll start listing off little programs that they have here and there. And, we acknowledge that every country has some sort of social programs or societal safety nets or anything like that. So the, AOC types will always point to these countries as, look at these programs that they have that are raging successes, like free college. They'll talk about how, they don't burden their kids over there with all of this school debt, which we have a big problem with school debt over here in this country. We fully acknowledge that, one created by the government, but that's a whole separate story. But when you actually start looking through the facts of these Nordic countries, you find out that their students also leave college with a pretty substantial amount of school debt. Now, this is mostly due to different educational fees or transportation or housing costs. And when the numbers, when you do all the math on the numbers, these students are actually leaving school with comparative amounts of debt as our US counterpart students. And in fact, I've got a stat here that says 70% of Swedish students take out school loans in a country where they have free college. So that should tell you pretty much everything you need to know about this program.
Right. And a large part of that, and this is something that can't be overlooked. A large part of that is that the cost of living there is ridiculously high because of all the taxes that we talked about before. And so the average student is paying a lot more than most students here in the United States just to live. And they're getting that all in loans. And so they actually do have these big, gigantic student loan burdens there as well. Not everybody, obviously, but not everybody here has that either. If you go to community college, or you go to a state school with a low tuition rate here, you're not going to graduate with a ton of debt either. I mean, it just depends on where you went to college, where you live, all sorts of other factors that play into that. But in these countries, and by the way, in these countries, they don't have that many colleges. You don't have that many choices either. By the way, in America, you can go to, there's literally hundreds of colleges. There's probably thousands of colleges across the country. In these countries, there's dozens of colleges. These are small areas. And so you don't have that many options either. So yeah, you get to go to school and you get to choose between 5 colleges in the whole country that you actually might want to go to. And that's it. I mean, it's really not that great of a situation. At the end of the day, you're still going to end up with debt. And that's why a lot of students in Scandinavia, or a lot of people in Scandinavia, choose not to go to college.
Yeah, a little factoid, you might not know this, but Justin actually went to clown college. He got a degree in juggling and pie throwing.
I think you could argue. I think you could argue that all colleges are essentially clown college. I mean, at this point, are you really getting a quality education when you go to college these days? I don't know if that's
a good
true.
point. Again, subject of another
at least
video
clown
here.
College is like a
you leave with a trade
program. Yeah, it's a trade school now.
All right, point number 6, kind of harping on this free college concept. Nordic countries have similar college enrollment rates despite free tuition. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting thing. You think if they are providing a free service and it's so good that 100% of people would do it, but in reality, they have comparable levels of college enrollment as they do here in the United States counterparts. And I'm sure there's several different reasons for this, but to me, the biggest reason I think is this perceived return on investment. So there was a study that was done in 2016 about kind of like how much more money you would make after getting a post-secondary education. In the United States, you could expect a 65% increase in your earnings, after attending college. Whereas in Denmark, you would only get a 29% boost, which is, pretty decent. In Sweden and Norway would only look forward to a 9% or a 2% boost, respectively, in increased future earnings. So it's like, these people aren't dumb. They're thinking, I'm going to trade in 4 years of my life to go to college so I can get a potentially 2% increase in my return on my investment of time and money. I'm not going to do it. So they don't. So they have similar enrollment rates as we do here in the United States.
Right. Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, right? The interesting thing is what people don't understand about so many economic issues is they just think, okay, well, college degree is valuable, so and people who graduate from college make XYZ more money. Therefore, if we make college free, now they just won't have that debt, but people will still make XYZ more money. But what they don't factor into it is that the reason why the students demand higher salaries when they graduate is because they paid so much for their college degree. So there's an expectation that, okay, I went and got my college degree and now I expect to make more money because I paid a lot of money for this college degree. And so the market reflects that. But if everyone's going to college and the tuition is free, then the employers are probably going to be less likely to give you more money. You're probably going to be more likely to take less money because you didn't pay tuition when you went to college. And so it all kind of evens itself out a little bit to some extent. And so I'm not saying it's worthless to have a college degree, but it's not as helpful as people think if it doesn't cost anything.
Well, also kind of the rarity of it. Like if you go to college to get like a whole another set of skills, but all these set of skills are also given out for free to anybody else that wants to do it. Then it's just like the novelty of your new set of skills
It,
is
if
right.
everybody, this is the thing, if everybody goes to college,
It
okay,
just
leave
turns
it.
into high school
It's high
2.0.
school. It's just another 4 years of high school. There's no difference.
Yeah.
It's no difference at all. Just like a high school degree. It's hard for people to understand this today, but there was a time when getting a high school degree meant something.
Right.
Like it actually was important to have a high school. People wanted to know that you had one. They wanted to see, it was part of the job process. You got a high school degree. It mattered. It doesn't matter anymore. Everyone has a high school degree. Who doesn't have a high school degree? Like just about everybody has a high school degree now. So it's all about college. And then in a lot of industries, it's not even about undergrad. Now it's about grad school. Did you go to grad school? Where'd you go to grad school? You don't have a master's degree? Well, then screw you. Like you're worthless. Like it depends on the industry, of course, but there's a lot of industries where that's the case. Teachers, for example, most teachers in a lot of states, you basically have to get a master's degree now. You can't, it's not good enough just to have a 4-year degree. So again, it's just all it's all relative. These things are all built into our economy already, and it doesn't work like you just wave a magic wand and we'll make other people pay for your college
Right.
tuition, and then all of a sudden you're going to be so much better off. It's not true. It's not free. Someone's paying for it, and if that person isn't you, it's hurting somebody else in some fashion. And so, and you're not even going to be that much better off for it as a result of it. So really, how great is that system? It sounds not that great. And again, remember, they don't have that many choices either. So they can't even go to that many places. Maybe that's why fewer people in some of these countries are going to college, because it's essentially like every college is an in-state college. There is, by American standards.
Good point.
Why would you want to go in-state? A lot of people don't want to. So.
Right. This one probably might be the most important point. Nordic countries are moving away from their socialist past, not towards it. So the big example for this one is Sweden. If you listen to Jonah Norberg, he talks about this all of the time. But basically, if you look into the history of Sweden, for example, Sweden was a powerhouse back in like the early 20th century. They were at full steam, just kicking butt, like a free economy, just whatever, right? It was like the fourth most, I think, per capita. They were doing the best off, like the fourth most or something like that. And then in the 70s, they took a hard left turn into socialism, and it was a disaster. All of a sudden, you saw stagnation, a degradation of the economy, living standards kind of going down, and all of this stuff for about 2 decades. And then in the 90s, they're like, all right, enough of this socialism crap. We need to get these engines of the free market going again. They passed a whole bunch of different free market reforms. And then we saw the economy starting to go up again. So it's like the biggest example of the fact that socialism is just like mud in the gears of an economy. And then the free market is taking out all of that mud and getting that engine back up and running. So the idea that Sweden is a socialist country, anyone that knows of the history will probably take offense to that. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you could actually argue that the most socialistic elements of these economies that everybody points to, like healthcare or free college, these are all things that came out of that horrible era of their economy. They're essentially just, vestiges of this terrible time of no economic growth. And so you really have to wonder, well, how great of ideas are these? We didn't pass these ideas in the best of times when, our economy was flying and we were making great decisions. We put these things into action in the worst of times, and we basically just don't want to get rid of them at this point. So maybe they work out okay. I don't know. I personally don't think that their healthcare system, it rivals ours. I don't think that their education system rivals ours either. I think they're okay, but they're not as good as our system is in a lot of ways. And so I think that the evidence speaks for itself even within these countries historically. They had more socialistic policies in the past than they do now, but they abandoned them because they were a horrible failure. Some of these countries saw no economic growth for decades and decades and decades. No economic growth. And they abandoned that system out of desperation because it was so bad. And now their systems are much, much better because they've become more like us. And here we are saying, you know what, maybe we should be more like they were 40 years ago when everything was horrible. That makes no sense. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and the next couple, very similar to the idea of their corporate income tax being like relatively low. It's just like these people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, they like to point to these Nordic countries as just like, we want the parts we want the parts that we want, and we don't want the other parts that we don't want. And one of those is the school choice. So Sweden actually has a very conservative, I guess, school choice program. So in the 90s, they started this as well. And when they were doing all their free market reforms, one of those was having like a universal school voucher system, basically a school choice system that would make any conservative proud. And it's just like, okay, you want a Nordic socialism like Sweden? Can we at least have this? And of course, they're going to say no, so it's just like, there's a bunch of examples of it. School choice is probably one of the bigger ones.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah. I think we can move on to that. I think you're 100% right. It's obvious, incredibly hypocritical of them. And it just added to the list of things where you say, okay, would Bernie Sanders support this?
No. Yeah. Well, here's a better one.
Long list of things.
Here's probably an even better one, especially in this day and age. Norway benefits hugely from fossil fuels. So again, the AOCs of the world are trying to rid the world of fossil fuels, and this mythical Nordic country of Norway is benefiting massively from it. I mean, this has got to be the one that kind of sticks in the craw of AOC the most.
Yeah, they have a $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, and Norway is actually one of the wealthiest countries in the world in a lot of ways because they don't have massive debt, So the people there are actually, in many respects, very wealthy. They don't have a big population. I think it's like 6 million people or so. They have a massive sovereign wealth fund, and it's all because of drilling oil. They're drilling oil, and they're, instead of doing what Venezuela has done with their massive oil reserves and just blown it on gigantic socialist programs and mismanaged the money and everything, in Scandinavian countries, they have relatively low amounts of debt, relatively speaking, by modern standards. In some countries are very fiscally responsible over there. They conserve their money. They save it for rainy day. And that's what they've been doing in Norway. And as a result, they have massive, massive amounts of money. It's also important to keep in mind that this is the only reason why, or this is the main reason why, Norway has even the socialist programs that it has. If they didn't have this massive sovereign wealth fund, if they didn't have this massive amount of money that they were getting from drilling oil, which, remember, AOC is against, Bernie Sanders is against, they wouldn't even be able to pay for the stuff that they have.
Sure.
So even the socialistic elements that they do have is the result of policies that Bernie Sanders and AOC don't want. So the whole thing comes crumbling down. School choice, drilling for oil, taxing the poor.
Right. Low corporate income tax rates.
Low corporate income tax rates. Like, does any of this sound even remotely socialistic?
Right.
No.
Like the picture that they're painting of this the system that we need to replicate. No, it's not. And then the last one here, some Nordic socialist countries are moving towards privatizing parts of their healthcare system. So I think I might have made a little note of this somewhere in this article that like we should probably do an entire 10 facts you need to know about just like universal healthcare. Like that should be its own standalone thing. But just for the purposes of this video, I wanted to point out that Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, they're actually, compared to just a few years ago, they are moving towards more private insurance. So this is generally speaking, like on top of their coverage that they have through the state. It's like additional coverage. But the citizens, when polled, say that their reason for moving towards this private insurance is because of dissatisfaction with government-run insurance. That's their primary motivation for this.
Right.
So it's just like, it's just a nice little snapshot of just, it's not as great as you think it is.
If Bernie Sanders were running these countries, they wouldn't even be allowed to buy private health insurance because he wants to completely ban it. He wants to make it illegal to have health insurance because he believes if you have health insurance, some people are going to have it and some people are not going to have it, and that's not socialistic.
Right.
So even if you have a massive government program, government paid for healthcare system, you still can't have any kind of private insurance on top of that, or else you end up with a 2-tier system of healthcare. That's how he would look at it. And so, again, is this what Bernie Sanders wants? No, it's not. So time after time after time after time after time, you look at all these different things, you see, no, actually, this is a totally different kind of system. Again, I said this at the onset. The thing that is so interesting about these countries are that they really are, there is no American equivalent to this, where you have single payer healthcare, but also we're going to have lots of value added taxes, and we're not going to have a really progressive tax system. Oh, and we're also going to have low regulations. Oh, and we're going to be fiscally responsible, and we're going to have school choice. Like these things don't, oh, and free college. Like they don't, there is no political party or group in the United States that has this same set of policies. It doesn't exist. And so it's a really weird system for Americans. And that's why it becomes whatever the left wants it to be, because they can say, oh, the socialists, look, they have government-run healthcare, and everyone just nods along and says, oh, well, I guess they're socialists over there.
Right.
And it's like they don't bother to look at, regulations. We didn't even get into minimum wage laws. That's a hot topic right now in the United States. In a lot of these countries, they don't have minimum wages. They don't even have minimum wage law. Think about that, right? So how socialistic can you be? Low corporate income taxes, no minimum wage laws. Some countries have near balanced budgets, $1 trillion surplus wealth fund. Like, these are not socialist countries.
And it's one thing that I would want to point out, and this maybe could just kind of wrap up this whole thing. It's just like, as we talked about, they're not socialist countries. They've got a free market system. And it's just like, not only do they have a free market system, but they've got a very good free market system, to a point where you're wondering, like, why aren't they like competing with us when it comes to living standards? And it's because of all these big, burdensome social programs that cause them to have such high taxes and all of that. So it's like, if they were to dispense with some of those and move towards privatizing other things, like like they're moving towards with the healthcare system, they'd probably have even more of a thriving economy.
Right.
So it's like the socialistic aspects is what's weighing the countries down.
Right. And the other thing to remember too, and this is really important for people to keep in mind, if you have an economy, if you have a society where everybody is highly taxed, then when you have something that's so-called free, it's not really free. It's just you're paying for it through your taxes. Yeah, you don't pay a health insurance company for health care, but you pay the government. You pay all that to the government. Instead, if you actually looked at, well, how much of their income do they pay for all these goods and services that they get, it's probably relatively comparable to the United States, except they make less money. So it's, at the end of the day, are they better off? That's the thing. Are they better off? And the answer is no, they're not better off. That doesn't mean our system is perfect. We need to fix our system. Lots of problems with it. No way am I defending it. Horrible, horrible aspects to the American system, whether it's higher education or government or whatever. But the idea that we should go towards a model that in reality doesn't actually exist in these countries, and instead adopt a model that has failed everywhere that has ever been tried, and that's somehow the solution to the problem, is completely ludicrous. Give me one example of socialism working. I still want it.
Right.
Give it to me. No one can give it to me. And this is the only answer you will ever get from people, is this.
Yeah.
And it is not socialism.
Right. Yeah. This is one of those reoccurring things. Oh yeah, these countries are good examples of socialism. No. This video and the related article on StoppingSocialism.com will give you all the ammunition you will possibly need to dismantle that myth. But that will do it today for this little segment of Stopping Socialism TV. If you like our stuff, you can go and you can find us on pretty much everything. Stopping Socialism on Facebook, Stopping Socialism TV on YouTube. We're on Parler now because Parler's back, so check that out. We also got merchandise, which I'm repping right now. If you could see my here, let me see if I could remove this. See my communism is for losers shirt, sweatshirt. So if you want to check out that, we've got a whole bunch of stuff on the top of stoppingsocialism.com. There's a banner there. You can check out all of our cool stuff. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Parler. Don't go anywhere else. Just
That's right. Go on to Parler. Follow us on Parler. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.